Hello, and welcome to Historical Humans Reads, where we take primary sources and bring them to your screen. I'm Colum Coleman, and today we are reading from Tales of the Alhambra, a collection of essays, sketches, and stories written by Washington Irving. Published in 1832, the tales were inspired by Irving's 1828 visit to the 14th century Muslim fortress and palace complex in Granada, Spain. The Tales was a highly influential work responsible for reintroducing the ornate palace of Alhambra and the time of the Muslim Caliphates of Spain to Western audiences. It was so successful that within 2 years of publication, it inspired another major literary work, Alexander Pushkin's The Tale of the Golden Cockerel. Today, we'll be reading part of The Legend of the Arabian Astrologer from Tales of the Alhambra. With that, let's begin. In old times, many hundred years ago, there was a Moorish king named Ibn Habuz, who reigned over the kingdom of Granada. He was a retired conqueror, that is to say, one who, having in his more youthful days led a life of constant foray and depredation, now that he had grown feeble and superannuated, languished for repose, and desired nothing more than to live at peace with all the world, to husband his laurels, and to enjoy in quiet the possessions he had wrested from his neighbors. So happened, however, that this most reasonable and pacific old monarch had young rivals to deal with, princes full of his early passion for fame and fighting, and who were disposed to call him to account for the scores he had run up with their fathers. Certain distant districts of his own territories, also, which during the days of his vigor he had treated with a high hand, were prone, now that he languished for repose, to rise in rebellion and threaten to invest him in his capital. Thus he had foes on every side, and as Granada is surrounded by wild and craggy mountains, which hide the approach of the enemy, the unfortunate Ibn Habuz was kept in a constant state of vigilance and alarm, not knowing in what quarter hostilities might break out. It was in vain that he built watchtowers on the mountains and stationed guards at every pass, with orders to make fires by night and smoke by day on the approach of an enemy. His alert foes, baffling every precaution, would break out of some unthought of defile, ravage his lands beneath his very nose, then make off with prisoners and booty to the mountains. Was ever peaceable and retired conqueror a more uncomfortable predicament? When Ibn Habuz was harassed by these perplexities and molestations, an ancient Arabian physician arrived at his court. His gray beard descended to his girdle, and he had every mark of extreme age. Yet he had traveled almost the whole way from Egypt on foot, with no other aid than a staff, marked with hieroglyphics. His fame had preceded him. His name was Ibrahim ibn Abu Ayyub. He was said to have lived ever since the days of Muhammad, and to be the son of Abu Ayyub, the last of the companions of the prophets. He had, when a child, followed the conquering army of Amru into Egypt, where he had remained many years studying the dark sciences, and particularly magic, among the Egyptian priests. It was, moreover, said that he had found out the secret of prolonging life, by means of which he had arrived to the great age of upwards 2 centuries, though, as he did not discover the secret until well stricken in years, he could only perpetuate his gray hair and wrinkles. This wonderful old man was honorably entertained by the king, who, like most superannuated monarchs, began to take physicians into great favor. He would have assigned him an apartment in his palace, but the astrologer preferred a cave in the side of the hill, which rises above the city of Granada, being the same on which Alhambra has since been built. He caused the cave to be enlarged so as to form a spacious and lofty hall with a circular hole at the top, through which, as through a well, he could see the heavens and behold the stars even at midday. The walls of this hall were covered with Egyptian hieroglyphics, with Kabbalistic symbols, and with figures of the stars in their signs. This hall he furnished with many implements, fabricated under his directions by cunning artificers of Granada, but the occult properties of which were known only to himself. In a little while, the sage Ibrahim became the bosom counselor of the king, who applied to him for advice in every emergency. Ibn Habuz was once inveighing against the injustice of his neighbors and bewailing the restless vigilance he had to observe to guard himself against their invasions. And when he had finished, the astrologer remained silent for a moment, and then replied, "Know, O king, that when I was in Egypt, I beheld a great marvel devised by a pagan priestess of old. On a mountain above the city of Borsa and overlooking the great valley of the Nile was a figure of a ram, and above it a figure of a cock, both of molten brass, turning upon a pivot. Whenever the country was threatened with an invasion, the ram would turn in the direction of the enemy, and the cock would crow. Upon this, the inhabitants of the city knew of the danger and of the quarter from which it was approaching, and could take timely means to guard against it." "God is great," exclaimed the pacific Abun Habuz. "What a treasure would such a ram to keep an eye upon these mountains and around me, and then such a crock to crow in time of danger. Allah Akbar, how securely I might sleep in my palace with my sentinels at the top." The astrologer waited until the ecstasies of the king had subsided, and then proceeded. After the victorious Amru, may he rest in peace, had finished his conquest of Egypt, I remained among the priests of the land, studying the rites and ceremonies of their idolatrous faith, and seeking to make myself master of the hidden knowledge for which they are renowned. I was one day seated on the banks of the Nile, conversing with an ancient priest, when he pointed to the mighty pyramids which rose like mountains out of the neighboring desert. "All that we can teach thee," he said, "is nothing to the knowledge locked up in those mighty piles. In the center of the central pyramid is a sepulchral chamber, in which is enclosed the mummy of the high priest who aided in rearing that stupendous pile, and with him is buried a wondrous book of knowledge, containing all the secrets of magic and art. This book was given to Adam after his fall, and was handed down from generation to generation to King Solomon the Wise, and by its aid he built the Temple of Jerusalem. How it came into possession of the builder of the pyramids is known to him alone who knows all things." When I heard these words of the Egyptian priest, my heart burned to get possession of that book. I could command the services of many of the soldiers of our conquering army, and of a number of the native Egyptians. With these I set to work and pierced the solid mass of the pyramid until, after a great toil, I came upon one of its interior and hidden passages. Following this up and threading a fearful labyrinth, I penetrated into the very heart of the pyramids, even to the sepulchral chamber where the mummy of the high priest had lain for ages. I broke through the outer cases of the mummy, unfolded its many wrappers and bandages, and at length found the precious volume on its bosom. I seized it with a trembling hand and groped my way out of the pyramid, leaving the mummy in its dark and silent sepulchre, there to await the final day of resurrection and judgment. "Son of Abu Ayub," exclaimed Ibn Habuz, "thou hast been a great traveler and hast seen many marvelous things. But what avail to me is the secret of the pyramid and the volume of knowledge of the wise Solomon? This it is, O king. By the study of that book, I am instructed in all magical arts, and can command the assistance of the genii to accomplish my plans. The mystery of the talisman of Borza is therefore familiar to me, and such a talisman can I make, nay, one of greater virtues." O wise son of Abu Ayyub, cried Ebn Huz, better were such a talisman than all the watchtowers on the hills and sentinels upon the borders. Give me such a safeguard, and the riches of my treasury are at thy command. The astrologer immediately set to work to gratify the wishes of the monarch. He caused a great tower to be erected upon the top of the royal palace, which stood on the brow of the hill of Albaysin. The tower was built of stone brought from Egypt and taken, it is said, from one of the pyramids. In the upper part of the tower was a circular hall, with windows looking towards every point of the compass, and before each window was a table, on which was arranged, as on a chessboard, a mimic army of horse and foot, with the effigy of the potentate that ruled in that direction, all carved of wood. To each of these tables there was a small lance, no bigger than a bodkin, on which was engraved certain Chaldaic characters. This hall was kept constantly closed by a gate of brass with a great lock of steel, the key of which was in possession of the king. On the top of the tower was a bronze figure of a Moorish horseman fixed on a pivot, with a shield on one arm and his lance elevated perpendicularly. The face of this horseman was towards the city, as if keeping guard over it. But if any foe were at hand, the figure would turn in that direction and would level the lance as if for action. When the talisman was finished, Ibn Habuz was all impatient to try its virtues, and longed as ardently for an invasion as he had ever sighed after repose. His desire was soon gratified. Tidings were brought early one morning by the sentinel appointed to watch the tower that the face of the bronze horseman was turned towards the mountains of Elvira, and that his lance was pointed directly against the pass of Lope. Let the drums and trumpets sound to arms, and all of Granada be put on alert, said Ibn Habuz. O king, said the astrologer, let not your city be disquieted, nor your warriors called to arms. We need no aid of force to deliver you from your enemies. Dismiss your attendants, and let us proceed alone to the secret wall of the tower. This has been an excerpt from The Tales of the Alhambra on Historical Humans Reads. If you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more excerpts from original texts, please subscribe to be notified of the next one. If there's a work you would like to hear, be sure to like the video and leave a comment listing it below. Thank you for listening.